Order. All rise. In today's debates, the plaintiff from Naptown, Indiana, Alex Golden, claims that his points of views are realistic and logical, unlike the defendant's. In return, the defendant, Mark Wallen, from the Salted Lakes of Utah, finds the plaintiff's case ridiculous and false. Who will win today's debates? Find out in today's episode of the Courtroom Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the debut episode of the Courtroom Podcast. I'm your co-host, Alex Golden, and joining me on the other line is Mark Wallen. Mark, what's going on, brother?
Hey, just happy to be here, man. I know it's been a good and exciting offseason so far, and we're excited to debut the show, and so I'm ready to get rolling. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so let's kind of just explain to everybody that's going to be a new listener. Obviously, me and Mark have done some podcasts together on the Let's Talk NBA side of things, but with the Courtroom Podcast, it's going to be more of like a debate thing. So today, Mark's going to introduce two topics, and I'll introduce two topics, and we'll kind of give our takes on it, and then, debate different opinions on those specific topics. But before we get into today's show, it is September 11th today, 2017, and 16 years ago, one of the most tragic things happened to America, but on that day, it brought America closer. So just thoughts and prayers out to everybody who was involved in that situation, those who may have lost a loved one that was fighting for our country during those times. Our thoughts and prayers go out to you. And you have any remarks on that, Mark?
No, not too much more. Obviously a tragic event in our country's history, and just along with that, we've had a lot of the natural disasters, Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, those going on at the same time. So just a time to reflect and be appreciative to those people that have sacrificed for our great country, and then also a time to reach out and really come together and help the people out that need help in Texas and Florida and Georgia, just like we all came together after 9/11. So definitely, shout out to those people in those affected areas, and definitely appreciation to the people that have helped make this country great. So.
Yeah, I concur with all those comments, and for those that are still struggling from the flood down there and the hurricane in Texas, and those that are trying to avoid Irma, just be safe. That's the biggest thing right now, and hopefully you guys can all find a safe spot while this tragic hurricane is coming. So, well, Mark, it looks like you're going to start us off today with topic one. So, are you ready for this?
Yeah, absolutely. So our first topic for the day is really this question about whether or not the new CBA has backfired in the NBA. The CBA, of course, being the collective bargaining agreement that the Players Association and the NBA come together on. They bargain back and forth until they come up with a bargaining agreement that's acceptable to both of them. And the bargaining agreement, simply put, is the governing law text that governs all the workings of the NBA. So governs how trades work, governs how salary caps work, how contract structure works, all those different kind of business side of things that really make the NBA run and make it to be what it is. All that's figured out in the CBA. But one of the newer additions to the CBA in this most recent rendition is this idea of designated player exceptions, or you may have heard it called a supermax contract or supermax extension. And really the idea was initially, at least it was proposed in this kind of a way, was that this new supermax contract or supermax extension would allow smaller market teams to hold on to their all-star players much more easily, because they would be able to give them significantly more money and an additional year on their max contract offers than another team would in open free agency market. So that was the plan. But if you've been paying attention to this NBA offseason at all, you can see that maybe has not exactly worked, and maybe has actually made things worse, as we've seen many all-stars not only leaving free agency, but have also been traded. So obviously, Gordon Hayward leaving the Utah Jazz is a great example of that. Paul George being traded from your Indiana Pacers. Even guys like Chris Paul, Jimmy Butler. I mean, all those guys, Kyrie Irving, all those guys are getting moved. And, some of it, was believed to be kind of money related, I guess, if you can say it that way, either coming from the team or from the player. And so I don't know. To me, it just doesn't seem like that plan to help smaller market teams keep their all-star players and their big name players has really worked, and it seems like it's backfired some. I mean, I think the best example is Isaiah Thomas with the Boston Celtics. Now, I know the Boston Celtics ended up getting Kyrie in return for Isaiah Thomas, but I think rumor has it at least that the Celtics were not a big fan of the idea of giving Isaiah Thomas a max extension or even a super max contract here in the near future, and so he's now gone. And, in a case like the Utah Jazz where they're not able to receive an all-star in return because they weren't able to give Gordon Hayward the max extension according to the qualifiers that are needed for that, being, the player has to be named to an all-NBA first, second, or third team in the most recent season, or they have to win Defensive Player of the Year, MVP, things like that. Something like that didn't work for the Jazz, and Hayward is now gone. So, I don't know. To me, it just seems like that's not working. It's actually caused more problems than it's solved in trying to create competitive balance in the NBA, and especially for these small market teams. But what's your opinion and your take on that?
Well, I think we're both kind of in the same boat because of the fan base we root for. Coming from a smaller market, and you don't lure in free agents that are top name guys because your city's not as attractive. But with that being said, I feel like this is, in a sense, on some of the owners and the front offices to draft better. I mean, we look at the Golden State Warriors, and everybody's sick and tired of hearing about them now. But for the most part, before they brought in Kevin Durant, that team was built within. They did excellent in drafting. Obviously the Timberwolves don't know how to draft, so that kind of helped the Warriors land guys like Steph Curry. But with that being said, I think that the biggest problem is you just can't miss, in a sense, if you're a small market. And so you see guys like Gordon Hayward, okay, well, he's in the Western Conference, and he likes Utah. He's got a good coach. He's got a good system, and they did extremely well this year. And, in some people's eyes, they might have over-exceeded their talent on their roster, but, they had a good chance, to be a competitive playoff team had he stayed there. But when you're looking at the Warriors and you're looking at the Spurs, two teams that have just been powerhouses the last couple of years, and you see what's happening in the Eastern Conference, it made sense for Gordon Hayward. But I think the biggest one for me is probably Kevin Durant. I know a lot of people want to say LeBron James started everything when he left Cleveland and went to Miami, but you look at what Kevin Durant did, this is a guy that was up 3-1. We all know the story. We all know the scenario. And then his team lost to the Warriors, and then he joined them last year. And so with that, it just kind of took away that competitiveness, because before that, I thought the playoffs were excellent. The year before, I really enjoyed watching the playoffs. This last year, not so much. And I think now the players, I wouldn't want to say have too much control, but they are definitely in control of what they do with their future. We have shorter contracts. I think the most you can get is a 5-year contract if it's with your current team. And before that, you could sign guys for 7-8 years long. And I think that really hurts franchises that are smaller, like a look at Indiana. Like, I remember when they signed Jermaine O'Neal for 7 years. There's no way they could get Paul George locked up for 7 years, if they were to keep him. So it's one of those things that at the end of the day, these guys want to play together. They want to win, and they can, play as long as they want to for their franchise. But if they're not going to win, and, winning is based on titles, it makes sense for them to want to get up and move and go play with a team that they think can help them get to that championship level. But I do agree that it does hurt the competitive balance, because the players just have, in a sense, too much control of what they do with their destiny, and franchises just have to be extremely smart when they make trades and when they do make draft decisions, because if they don't put the right pieces around the guys they're building around, then they're going to eventually walk away and find something better.
Right. Well, but even in the case of the Utah Jazz with Gordon Hayward, I think we can all agree that the Jazz did everything right. Sure, maybe they outperformed their roster a little bit. They still had a really excellent roster. They drafted really well. They added free agents, both young guys and veterans, especially this last season with Joe Johnson, Boris Diaw, those kind of guys, George Hill, to really help them win. And then they did. They won, and they made the playoffs despite a bunch of injuries. They won a playoff series. They won a Game 7 on the road against a very experienced Clipper team. The Jazz did everything right, But then in the offseason, Gordon Hayward doesn't make an All-NBA team, and now he's no longer available for the Supermax extension or a new Supermax contract in his case with the Jazz. And so now it's an even playing field between the Jazz and Boston, and now Hayward gets to decide between, the meat grinder that the West has become and the weak East and his old college coach and Brad Stevens. And so I don't know, like, to me in that situation, it just seems like even if a team does everything right, if the cards don't just line up perfectly for that player to get that money incentive from the team, even though he is really, really good and arguably is an All-NBA talent, if he just doesn't get the votes falling his way, then the franchise is out of luck. And honestly, the Jazz went into that with just a gamble, a roll of the dice of whether or not he would make that All-NBA team if they would have that monetary incentive to overcome the pull of Boston and free agency, and it just didn't work out. And so I just think it's just tough for franchises now because they either do something like that where they do everything right and then they just gamble and hope that they can keep their guy with the money, the extra money they can give him, or in some cases they may have a guy that is really, really good but not quite good enough to give 35% of the cap to, which is what the max contract is in that Supermax deal. Like James Harden, and Steph Curry, look at their deals, how big those are. I mean, you have to ask yourself, even if Hayward did make the All-NBA team, is he really worth that kind of money? Is he really a top 10, top 15 talent in the NBA that can lead your team to a championship? Or do you let him go or try and move him before that comes into effect so you can get more pieces at a cheaper cost? And so I just think it puts teams in a tough place where, you either have to have a top guy that you're going to pay, or you better hope that your middle of a guy gets into an All-NBA team before that deadline comes up, because if not, he's more than likely going to a bigger market team or to a weaker conference like Hayward did going to Boston. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to it and how to fix competitive balance in the NBA, but I think it's an interesting topic to keep in mind and look at moving forward, especially as the NBA discusses the potential changes in the draft lottery, with flattening the percentages out and making it more likely that lower teams will jump up into the lottery and less likely that the bottom teams will stay in the top three. I think all of that's related to finding this competitive balance, and I'm not sure where that line is, but it's definitely an interesting topic to think about and to ask questions about moving forward. Yeah,
and before we do move on to the next topic, just one thing I want to say is, like, you can almost make a case for every player and how different it was. Like, you look at the Thunder with Kevin Durant. Okay, so he left a great situation where they had very good playoff success, but they hadn't got over the hump, and so he went to the Warriors. Well, then you look at, the Jazz, who had Hayward. They did everything they could. They never mentioned him in a trade talk, and they were just really focused on keeping him on the team, even though there was that one time before he signed that contract where he signed a restricted free agency contract with the Charlotte Hornets, and I think the Utah Jazz matched that. So that's something you have to look back at too. It's like, okay, well, the Jazz let Hayward get to that point where he signed with another team instead of offering him that contract. So maybe there was some ill feelings. I'm not saying there was, but there's a possibility that could have been something, because at that point, I think we can all say Hayward was not max level player when he signed that with Charlotte. But when going forward, the Jazz did everything they could to keep him, and they built a team around him that was a really good team, and it's probably a top 3 team in the East, if they're not in the Western Conference, because of how loaded the West is. But then you look at Paul George, who there was a lot of rumblings around there that he didn't want to be there, and so the Pacers explored a couple trades. Whether they say they did or didn't, it's obviously they did, and they looked for trades. Paul didn't like it, and then to kind of get back at the Pacers, his agent went out and had conversations with Rob Pelinka, and now we see that the tampering happened. But it just shows you, like, there's so many different situations that you can look at and just break down different scenarios, and whether you like them or not, I mean, that's, at the end of the day, the players are the ones that control their destiny. And if they're telling guys, hey, I'm not going to sign here, I'm not going to play here, I want to play here, it's going to make the trade value hard for a team that's a smaller market to get value out of them. Like, people ragged all the Pacers because they only got Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis. But who really knows what was out there? I mean, we hear everything from different sources, but, the Pacers sources are going to say, oh, we never had that. But then, the Celtics are going to say, well, we had something better. And the Cavs are going to say, we had something better. Well, nobody really knows. It's just all hearsay. And I think when it comes down to it, you just have to look at everything individually. And if you want to, use a good example of building players within, I think Golden State is the perfect example. And I think you can kind of say that too about the Lakers and how they're doing things, and the Celtics and how they're doing things now. Obviously, they have the markets that are bigger to entice free agents, but with their core guys, trying to develop them from the bottom and then build them up. I think that's the best way to go, for franchises going forward, and you just cannot rely on your players being loyal, because just like we saw with Isaiah Thomas, just as much as fans want players to be loyal, owners aren't as loyal either, because the fact that Danny Ainge did trade Isaiah Thomas, who was the heartbeat of the Celtics last year, just goes to show you this is a business. And at the end of the day, no matter what happens, you've got to do what's best for business, for yourself or for your team or your franchise. And then the last thing I wanted to say on that is I do not like that the all NBA teams determine whether or not you're eligible for a Supermax. I think it's kind of unfair to have the media vote on that, because I think it should almost be a committee in the NBA, not just media guys, but a committee in Secaucus or wherever headquarters are at for the NBA, and they should decide what they think, based on stats and all these different regulations, like they had this many games, they played this amount of games, like whatever, that should determine it before having media guys just say, well, this guy was the best player, they get this many votes, and so on. So do you have anything to say to that?
Yeah, absolutely, and I totally agree. I mean, it's almost like the NBA 2K ratings that come out every year. I get so frustrated when a new NBA 2K game comes out, because the rating system is completely subjective from the developers that are making the game, right? So players get whatever rating that the developers think that they should have, rather than basing it off of an objective analysis of the player's statistics. And I've never understood why an NBA 2K game couldn't just port real life statistics into some system that would convert it into a rating in their game, rather than having it be some subjective thing. So I'm with you. I think it should be something similar along that lines, is where it's not subjective based upon human voters and their opinions and their biases, but there should be some kind of an objective measure where players are placed in those all NBA teams or win Defensive Player of the Year or so on and so forth according to the numbers, because the numbers are really telling the story of what's actually happening on the floor. And I get that, like, not everything is statistics. I'm not one of those people that's going to say statistics everything, the eye test is garbage. I think it's a synergy of both. But the way it's structured right now, it's definitely heavily favored towards the subjectivity of people and their biases rather than the objectivity. And with that much money and that much meaning behind those decisions and those votes, I definitely think there needs to be a change in the system. So I completely agree with you there.
Yeah, so I know this is a debate show, but I think we're pretty much agreeing on the first topic. There's just a lot of things to look at there. But let's move forward to the next topic. And this one we're going to talk about the Boston Celtics and all the moves they've made this offseason. Last year they were the number one team in the Eastern Conference, made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, but unfortunately they did not last very long against the Cleveland Cavaliers. They lost in 5. But looking at the Celtics team, we've already talked about Gordon Hayward. They've added Kyrie Irving, but they've also added a lot of new players and had a lot of core players go. So we're going to talk basically, will these moves make the Celtics the best in the Eastern Conference, where they're number one, able to be the number one seed again in the Eastern Conference, and the number 2, are they able to dethrone the Cavaliers and LeBron James? And I'm going to start this one out. It just the thing with me with the Celtics is there's only 4 players on their roster this season that were there last year. Do you know who those 4 players are?
Oh gosh. That's a good question. I don't even know if I can name that off the top of my head. Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, and Terry Rozier. And who else am I missing? There's someone else in there, but those are like the only 3 I can even think of.
It's a starter.
Oh, Al Horford.
Yeah, course, Al Horford. So there's 4 guys out of 15 guys that they're bringing in. They've lost so much of their core, and I really think that they're going to struggle early on, making all these late moves. I think they have a better team for sure. There's no doubt about that. I think they're going to be better. And come the end of the season, they probably will be more of a threat to the Cavaliers. One, for the fact that Kyrie's not on the Cavs. And then number two, that they've gotten more talent with Kyrie and Gordon Hayward. I think the question now is, who's the best player on the Celtics? Is it Kyrie or is it Gordon Hayward? And I think overall you have to say Hayward because he can do a little bit of everything. But when it comes to putting a team on his back and getting a late game bucket, I don't know if there's a better scorer in the league than Kyrie Irving in the clutch. But I hate to say this, but I am not an Al Horford fan. I think he's a good basketball player, but I don't see a championship team with Al Horford on it. I just cannot see him out there against the Golden State Warriors playing significant minutes. And my biggest concern is the fact that he wants to play the power forward, and he doesn't want to play the center. Well, if the Warriors go to their death lineup with Draymond playing the center, Al Horford's going to have to play center, and I'm not sold on the Celtics being able to do that. But let alone, I still think the Cavaliers are the team to beat in the Eastern Conference. I don't think the Celtics are the best team. I think if LeBron James does indeed leave next season, that they're the front runners to be the number one seed. But right now, based on season standings, I don't even know if I have the Celtics as a number 2 seed. I can see the Celtics really becoming a 3 seed this season in the Eastern Conference with all the additions they made to their roster. It's just so much turnover. It's going to take them quite a while to develop some chemistry. So what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, so I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. So I'm going to bring back the Golden State Warriors when Kevin Durant first joined the Golden State Warriors. Okay, one of the biggest worries, and I should probably say the only worry about that when Kevin Durant joined that team was, well, I guess it was really 2 things. One, it was whether or not they would actually be able to develop chemistry on the floor and be able to share the ball between that many great players. Okay, and I'm not saying the Celtics have that problem, but they definitely have subtracted some of their depth and really collected that depth and put it into more talented players like Gordon Hayward and Kyrie Irving rather than having it spread out over many players. Okay, so I think your point to the fact that it is a bunch of new players. There's only 4 returning players from their roster from last season returning back this season. I think that's a fair concern. But just like with Golden State, I think that even with all the new additions and changes, they're just so much more talented than before. I mean, one of the biggest knocks on the Celtics was, sure, they have great depth, but outside of Isaiah Thomas, they really didn't have that all-star guy that could really take the team, carry it on his back, go out and win you a game in the clutch, anything like that. Now, Isaiah Thomas did that last year, but even before last year, I mean, that was still a huge question mark because Isaiah Thomas hadn't turned into this monster that could just win you a game any game at the end of the game because he was so clutch. And now, they've done that. They've turned their assets and their depth into multiple stars. They have Gordon Hayward, who is a lot better than a lot of people want to give him credit for. I'll die on the mountain of Gordon Hayward is better than, guys like Paul George and, and some of those things. And I won't get into that because I know some of your Indiana Pacer listeners out there, they and I have had more than a few heated discussions about that. But I mean, Gordon Hayward, in my opinion, is a top tier player. He probably should have made an All-NBA team. I know he didn't this last year, but that's the kind of talent he has. And, just to be honest, I mean, Jay Crowder, Avery Bradley, sure, great players. Kelly Olynyk, all great players, but they're not a Gordon Hayward. They're not a top 20 player in the NBA. And Kyrie Irving's the same thing. And you can make an argument that Kyrie Irving, even though some of the advanced statistical measures don't show him being as good as Isaiah Thomas, they do show that, he probably is a better overall player because he can play a little bit defense better than Isaiah Thomas can. And, he has that killer instinct. He still has that clutch gene in him like Isaiah Thomas does. So I think, again, back to that point, I think the chemistry things, sure, that's fair and we'll see how it is. But just like Golden State, when you have talent wins in this league. So I'm not worried about it. And then that second concern I was going to bring up with Golden State, the same concern with the Celtics, which I've kind of alluded to, is whether or not they're going to have enough depth to compete and to challenge a team like the Cavaliers. But, again, same thing like Golden State. Like everyone was worried about how much depth they had. It doesn't matter. When you have that much talent on top of your roster, with Kyrie, Gordon Hayward, Al Horford, those kind of guys, you're going to win games because talent wins games in this league. I know a lot of people like to get caught up in the importance of having a deep bench and, all these different things. But at the end of the day, a LeBron James, a Russell Westbrook, a James Harden, a Kyrie Irving, a Gordon Hayward, Kevin Durant, a Steph Curry, those really big time star talents are the talents that are winning you games, taking you to the playoffs and really making things happen. So I'm not worried about it. I think they're really good. I think they're better than they were last season, or at least they have the potential to be. I do think that if they have injuries, especially to either one of those guys, Kyrie or Gordon, that they're going to have issues. But I think Las Vegas has the over/under for them at 54.5 wins. I think that's a pretty fair assessment of where they're at. And the Cavaliers are projected to be at 52.5. So I think it'll be a close battle for those two at the top. Especially with Isaiah Thomas projected to be out for the Cavaliers moving forward here for the first little bit of the season at least. So I don't know. I think talent wins, and they got more talent. So that's kind of where I stand with the Celtics there.
Well, I think we're kind of agreeing and disagreeing at the same time, which is a little bit interesting because I think the Celtics are better today than they were last year. But I don't think that their record's going to show that, and their record's not going to indicate that until it gets to playoff time. Now, you brought up the Golden State Warriors, and I want to challenge you on this because you said, well, they don't have much depth, and they had a lot of issues with chemistry, like that was a concern. Well, let's think about it this way. You take off Harrison Barnes and put arguably the best player or the second best player in the NBA in that position, who is a lights-out shooter, who's 7 foot, who can block shots when he wants to, and he can really play defense when he wants to. So you substitute that out. That's nothing, and then you get rid of Andrew Bogut because he got hurt. You add in Zaza Pachulia, okay, but you still had your core guys there. You had your Andre Iguodala, you had your Draymond Green, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Sean Livingston. There was enough guys there, plus their head coach, and that obviously the head coaching doesn't really matter as much because Stevens isn't going anywhere, but they had their core intact. You look at this new regime of the Celtics, all they have is Al Horford, Jaylen Brown, who were brought in last year. The longest tenured guy on that team is Marcus Smart. And that's all I'm saying is, you can bring in a couple of new guys that are all-star level players, and they're going to give you your wins, trust me. They're going to be a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference, I have no doubt about it. And I really think they're going to push the Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference Finals when they play them there. But I do have concerns about overall regular season record being better than it was last year because I do think that all this turnover is going to be a bigger change than it was for the Warriors last season, adding in someone as talented as Kevin Durant, because no matter how much you love Kyrie Irving or how much you love Gordon Hayward, the argument out there for them being a top 10 player is either they're right on the edge or they're right outside of it or they're right inside of it. They're not a top 2 player in the league like Kevin Durant. So to make that argument, I think, it's a little unfair to try to compare what the Warriors did and bringing in someone that great to what the Celtics did, especially since they left so many guys on the current roster for the Warriors, where the Celtics are rebuilding completely.
No, yeah, and I think that's a fair point. I think that's a good point as well because, like you're saying, Golden State already had an established culture and chemistry, and then they just had to supplant in one of the greatest and most talented players in the league. And so, like to your point, how hard can that be in comparison to having almost an entire roster turnover? So I think that's fair. And I think, too, along with that, there are some interesting concerns about Boston and the moves that they made. I mean, even if you just look kind of at the micro level, comparisons between Gordon Hayward and Jay Crowder. I mean, Jay Crowder, if you go look at the advanced statistics, he's actually better than Gordon Hayward in net rating, assist ratio, rebound percentage, and effective field goal percentage, right? So, I mean, it's not like Jay Crowder was some Joe Schmo that they just got rid of, and Gordon Hayward's that massive of a step up there as far as statistical comparisons are concerned. Yes, Gordon Hayward is considered superior in talent in that kind of a way, but, Jay Crowder's going to be a big missing hole that they're going to have to figure out how to fill, especially with his versatility. And his ability to play in the post and to defend players and to allow other offensive talented players to worry about offense and not defense. Whereas, Gordon Hayward with the limited depth that they have now, may have to do a little bit more on both ends of the floor, and that may wear him out some as the season progresses. And, Avery Bradley, another great example, another really good player that has really good advanced statistics that people often overlook. And kind of along with that, though, not only did they lose really good players like that, that are probably underrated to some degree, but they also really didn't address some of their biggest needs, right? I mean, Boston was so great last year. They had this system where they ran 5 guys out, and they really didn't have a true center, and they really spaced the floor, which allowed Isaiah Thomas to be really, really good at what he does best, was just scoring one-on-one and getting around guys and finishing at the rim in crafty ways. But the biggest thing with Boston is they could never rebound, and they didn't have a rim protector. And they didn't really address that this offseason. Sure, they added talent, but they still have the same fundamental problem. So it'll be interesting to see, kind of along with all the points that you made, if those things, that talent upgrade really is as big as we think it is. Maybe we're overrating the guys they brought in, or maybe we're underrating the guys that they sent out. And then also, is that talent upgrade a big enough filler to also fill in the gaps that they already had previously existing that still exist now? So, I mean, they're definitely an interesting team to watch. I think it'll be a lot of fun. And, of course, they're going to be a huge storyline in the season with all the different things that have happened. So it'll be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with what you're saying there. It's just going to be wait and see mode with this Celtics team, because I think we all agree that the talent is there, and we're believing that it's going to be something, really fun to watch. But right now, you just have to kind of wait and see what happens, because there are areas of concern. But looking at how poor the East is, I think the Celtics are going to be very good for a very long time. So before we move on to the next topic, man, we got to take a quick break. My man Oz Davis from the Grueling Truth Network is going to let you all know about Seat Giant. And whenever this is done, we'll come back and finish up the rest of the show. All right?
Hi, I'm Oz Davis, the Chief Content Editor here at the Grueling Truth Network. I'll get you back to your regular podcast in about 90 seconds, but first I'd like to tell you about Seat Giant, the sponsor of the Grueling Truth Network. Seat Giant is the online ticket marketplace you need to truly find the best prices across a nice selection of seats for sports and events across North America. We're talking Major League Baseball, NFL, and CFL football, NBA basketball, NHL, hockey, boxing, MMA, wrestling, concert, theater, and, as they used to say in the old infomercials, much more. What makes Seat Giant different from some other sites? A couple of significant differences. One, Seat Giant is hands-on with its ticket-selling services. Each ticket source is verified as a bona fide sales point of sports and entertainment ticket sales. Not one counterfeit or invalid ticket has ever been sold through Seat Giant, and not one ever will be. Second, Seat Giant is more than just a middleman in the ticket buying process, and their customer service stands behind the customer at every step. Not only does this mean that the posted price is the price you'll pay with no hidden fees tacked on to your price, but also they offer a 100% money-back guarantee should your tickets not arrive on time or the chosen event be canceled. You can visit Seat Giant today for the lowest prices on North American sports events and entertainment at SeatGiant.com. And Canadian citizens and residents should note they can check out SeatGiant.ca for pricing in Canadian dollars. Plus, show your support for the Grueling Truth Network and get a discount on every order by entering promo code TRUTH. That's TRUTH at checkout from either site, SeatGiant.com or SeatGiant.ca. Seat Giant, more than just a ticket seller, a marketplace to buy experiences.
The Courtroom Podcast.
Alrighty, everybody, welcome back. We're going to hit the second segment of our show. Well, actually, it's the second half of our show, and we're going to come up with topic 3 right now. Mark's going to introduce this one for y'all. So, Mark, you ready for this?
Yeah, absolutely. So our third topic that we wanted to talk about today was, of course, again, centered around the offseason moves that we saw, and one of the biggest ones that we saw. So obviously there was a massive trade between Cleveland and the Boston Celtics, where we saw Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, and one of the Brooklyn Net picks that the Boston Celtics had been hoarding and holding on to for so long. And they finally turned those assets into Kyrie Irving, that big all-star that everyone's been wanting them to go out and get. And so really what we wanted to talk about is what should Cleveland do with that Nets pick? That was reportedly one of the biggest reasons why the Cavaliers made that deal. Maybe not even necessarily because of Isaiah Thomas, especially with the hip injury, that's been widely talked about as that trade got hung up there for a little bit. But, the Nets pick is a really good pick. Like I was mentioning, the Boston Celtics had held onto that pick for a long time. They were reportedly unwilling to include it in trade talks for Paul George. And so if that tells you anything about how much they value that draft pick there, they really wanted to keep it, but they eventually and ultimately moved it over on to Cleveland there. And so, I think Cleveland is in an interesting situation because they still have LeBron James on the roster. When you still have LeBron James on the roster, you still have a chance at winning an NBA championship, right? But with all the different things that have happened over there in Cleveland, if you kind of watch the news headlines, it's starting to sound like LeBron is no longer happy in Cleveland yet again for the second time, and it's starting to look very similar to when he left the first time, where he's not happy with management. He seems stuck with the roster that he has, and obviously they've had a hard time overcoming the Warriors this last season, where they could barely eke out a game against them in the finals there, and so. Rumors have it that LeBron is looking to move west. And so the question really becomes, though, if you're Cleveland, do you hold on to that Nets pick and use it to start your rebuild process once LeBron leaves in free agency? Or do you use that Nets pick, which has a ton of value in it, to try and go after someone like, maybe a DeMarcus Cousins or an Anthony Davis or one of these other big-name players, try and bring them in to appease LeBron and help him get a talent upgrade and help replace some of the talent you're losing with Kyrie Irving while Isaiah Thomas is out, and make another run at the championship, and then hope and pray that you can somehow mend and bandage things with LeBron and keep him on the roster moving forward and let him, hopefully and ultimately retire there as a Cavalier. So, Alex, what are some of your thoughts there? I know you're an Eastern Conference guy. I'm sure you have a pretty strong opinion on this. What do you think the best move for the Cleveland Cavaliers is with that Brooklyn Nets pick that they've acquired?
Well, I actually wanted to hear what you wanted to say. I wanted to hear what you had to say first. What do you think they should do with it? This is your opening segment, so I want to hear your case for what they should do with it first, and then I will reply to that. I feel like I've got two ways I can go with this based on how you respond, so I'm just ready for you.
Okay, no, yeah, So my opinion is this. I think I'm pretty convinced that LeBron is leaving. I think there's been too much smoke around that and too much talk and chatter from everybody around the NBA and within the NBA to really think otherwise. I think it would be great if LeBron stayed in Cleveland and he retired as a Cavalier. I think that would be the storybook ending. But from what I've heard, there's been just a very big divide made between him and management and ownership. Especially with the general manager, Griffin, being removed here recently. I know from talking with some front office executives that used to be a part of the Cleveland franchise that, LeBron was very close to that front office team and really enjoyed working with them and respected that the work that they did, and was very unhappy with Griffin's removal and the change of the guard there. And they traded Kyrie, and you can think what you want about that, whether Kyrie wanted out or not, or if LeBron wanted him out, or whatever the circumstances surrounding that were. But the fact is that they're less talented now, especially with Isaiah Thomas being out of the lineup for so long with his hip injury, and maybe he doesn't ever even suit up this season, depending on how severe it is. So, I think LeBron's heading to LA. I think he's already laying the groundwork for it. He's already been talking about how he's impressed with Lonzo Ball, which, is you don't just say that because, for no reason. LeBron is so calculating. He says everything and does everything for a reason. I think that's just laying the groundwork for him to go there. And with all of his LA connections, his movie industry connections that he wants to pursue after basketball, I think that just makes too much sense. And so I think he's headed now. So that being said, I think Cleveland should hold on to the pick. I think this next year's draft is really loaded up at the top. They're going to have a great chance at landing, a top 3, top 5 pick. And, there's arguably 3 or 4 guys in this next year's draft that could be number 1 picks. Very similar to this last year's draft. It's not quite as deep after, a top 10, top 15 like this last year's draft was, but it's really, really deep up at the top, and you're going to get one of those picks. And I think it's going to be time to restart the franchise. And very similar to what they did before when they drafted Kyrie Irving and they had a new franchise guy. I think that's what they got to do again. They got to hold on to the pick, try and get another Kyrie that they can throw the franchise on top of, really get behind and start building around again. It's going to be hard. No one likes to rebuild. It's a tough, long process, and it sucks. But, you know, if LeBron leaves, you have to have that pick, or it's going to make it that much harder for them to move forward. So that's where I'm coming from. But what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is a great topic because you look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they still are the favorites to win the Eastern Conference because they have LeBron James. And this is where LeBron is from. And I think it'd be awesome if, you know, LeBron somehow won another championship for Cleveland. I don't think anybody sees that happening. But here's what you got to look at. I understand your side of things. You know, they have to think about the future of this team if he does leave. But there's a reason they've invested so much money into this organization since LeBron's been here. Because if LeBron's here and you're winning and you actually prove that you have a chance to beat the Warriors, you might be able to change his mind and keep him around longer. The problem with the Cleveland front office is it's so inconsistent. The owner just can't ever stay with the general manager for more than their tenure that he hires him for. He puts every one of his stars' names out there besides LeBron James in trade rumors to try to make his roster better to, you know, appease LeBron James. And all that's landed him was, you know, Kevin Love becoming the joke of the Cleveland Cavaliers the past couple seasons. And now he's lost Kyrie Irving because all of this drama has just become so much centered around LeBron James. And so I think if you're Dan Gilbert, you have to be selfish here because if you lose LeBron James, you're more than likely going to have to get rid of Kevin Love. Isaiah Thomas, you're probably not going to bring him back on a max contract because they're going to overpay for him. So now you're stuck with mediocre players like J.R. Smith, Amon Shumpert, you know, you got Channing Frye's contract still. All these big contracts and nothing to show for. I mean, Tristan Thompson will be a nobody if he doesn't have the right people around him. He's just going to look like another guy out there. I love Tristan Thompson the way he plays, but if he doesn't have LeBron, Kyrie, and Kevin Love out there, he's just going to look like a normal role player. So I think the Cavaliers really have to think hard about this because the Nets have made improvements on their roster. And if people... I know they have not made a ton of improvements, but if you look at this Eastern Conference, I'm telling you right now, Chicago's playing for the lottery. I mean, they're not trying to win. Atlanta's not trying to win. As much as Indiana says they're trying to win, I don't see it right now. Orlando's still quite a bit of ways, too, because they're very young. What happens if Brooklyn gets like the 6th or 7th pick? That's not great. I mean, and once that pick, gets set in stone at 6 or 7 and the season keeps going out longer and longer, that pick becomes less valuable to the Cavaliers. Now, I don't necessarily think that DeMarcus Cousins is the right fit for them, but right now at point guard, who knows how long Isaiah Thomas is out? Do you really want Jose Calderon and Derrick Rose running your point guard for your team that's supposed to make the Eastern Conference Finals? I mean, sorry, that's just not going to happen. I think the Cavaliers would be better off having LeBron James run point guard with Jay Crowder and J.R. Smith out there and just being this ridiculously huge team and going against all small ball and just like their smallest guy out there be J.R. Smith. I just think that would honestly be the smartest thing for them to do. So I think they have to consider everything. And if they can find someone out there that is an improvement, whether it be a wing player or it be a point guard, because as much as we love Isaiah Thomas, this was more about the pick. Okay? And I think having Isaiah, and then if you can bring Isaiah off the bench as a spark plug, if you bring in somebody that's, that can change a game, I'm not sure who's out there or who's even available right now. So this is all just, thinking out loud. But if they could possibly trade that pick and get someone that's a starter level player, like if it's not working out, like let's just say for an example, the Houston Rockets, their whole entire team with their whole entire core of James Harden and Chris Paul just does not mesh, and so one of them wants out. What if they decide they're going to trade Chris Paul because he's only got 1 year left on his contract? Where else would he go besides the Cavaliers? That makes perfect sense for the Rockets. Or you look at the Heat that have Goran Dragic down there, and while he's getting a little bit older, I think that if the Heat start to struggle, because a lot of people are expecting the Heat to improve from last year because they had a great end of the season, but overall they were still a 500 team, so nobody knows how good they're really going to be. So you have to just look at all these different options and think about what is best for the Cavaliers. And I would try to find the best player out there this year, because you have to entice LeBron and show him that you're going all out and you're not worried about the future because he is the now. And if you give up on LeBron, I'm sorry, but it's going to take 10 to 15 years again before Cleveland basketball is relative.
Yeah, and I understand where you're coming from as well, but at the same time, like, if they make that trade, I mean, even if they can get a guy like Chris Paul, which I don't think is going to happen, I think Houston's going to be really, really good. I think Chris Paul's going to be just fine and just dandy, happy to be there in Houston. But let's just say you can get somebody like that. Well, then the next question is, well, is that enough to beat Golden State? Because essentially what Cleveland has to do if they're trading that pick in order to keep LeBron is beat Golden State. And I don't think there's anybody that they can go get right now or, ever other than guys on Golden State, which obviously isn't going to happen, that would make a big enough difference in Cleveland to help them beat Golden State, right? So if they can't do that, then why should they make that move, right? Because, sure, you bring back another All-Star, but, any other of the other All-Stars you're probably going to get are probably going to be heading out as well once LeBron leaves. Like, why would you stay in Cleveland if you're an Anthony Davis or even a DeMarcus Cousins when you can go find another team that's better and has a better shot at making the playoffs each and every year instead of staying with the bare bones of Cleveland? Like you mentioned, like all those players, once LeBron is gone, they're going to just be a bunch of nobodies, right? And so, as great as some of those guys are that they may bring in when they trade that pick, they're no LeBron, and they're going to have a hard time making the playoffs, even in a weak East. And if they have any injury problems on top of that, it's just this deep, dark hole you can go down. But, so to me, that's where I'm like, hey, look, like you're a top 2 team in the East. You're probably going to make the finals again. You probably are just better off running with who you got, hoping Isaiah Thomas gets healthy, and hoping that Golden State gets beat up in the playoffs, and then by the finals they're injured and unhealthy like they were the year that you beat them, a couple seasons ago. And so and then you get to keep the pick as well. If you keep that pick, you might end up with Michael Porter, Marvin Bagley, DeAndre Ayton, Mohamed Bamba, Luka. You might end up with any of those guys who could end up being one of those next LeBron type players. I'm not saying any of those or quite the prospect that LeBron was coming up, but all those guys have the potential to be an all-star, all-NBA talent. So, even, and like I was mentioning earlier, even if the Brooklyn pick drops down to, 5, 6, or 7, this draft is so deep, you can still get one of those guys, or you have a good shot at getting one of those guys, or you can make, a trade up a couple picks to get into that range, and you can make something happen then. So to me, it just seems like the low-risk move, at least for now and for the future, but especially for the future, is to hold on to that pick, wait and see what happens with it, wait and see what happens in the playoffs, and then you just let LeBron make his decision. If he stays, great. If he doesn't, then, oh well, he's probably leaving anyways, and you're better off in the future moving forward. So, that's where I'm coming from. That's what I would do, but I can totally understand what you're saying as well.
Yeah, and I'm on the fence with both because I think there's great cases for both of them. But here's the one thing you have to remember. What do they say about a draft pick? Once it's selected, it's lost all its value. So right now, this draft pick is at its peak. And you just have to really, think about this. Don't give LeBron that sense of, oh, they're moving on from me. They're going to look towards the future. Because then that means he'll play this season out, but he's gone after that. And that's just going to break Cleveland's hearts again to see LeBron leave and say, man, we had all this opportunity to make something out of this, And I love Isaiah Thomas, right? I think Isaiah Thomas is a fun player, but defensively, he can't stop anybody. He's just too little no matter how hard he tries. Another just scenario that kind of popped in my head that I could see freaky happening. Like, I don't think it'll happen, but it's just like a what if happen. The Cavaliers wanted Paul George really bad. And let's just say come around the trade deadline, Cleveland picks the phone up. They're like, hey, Paul George has made it clear he wants to go to L.A. He's not going to re-sign with you. We'll give you Kevin Love and the Nets pick for Paul George. Would the Thunder say no to that? Or would they take that because Kevin Love's got more guaranteed? And then you bring in Paul George with LeBron James, with Jay Crowder. That's a really tough team that matches up better with the Warriors. And I think... I honestly think that that's not going to happen, but it just kind of makes sense because Westbrook and Kevin Love play together at UCLA. They have a connection. Paul George does not want to be in Oklahoma City, and he said he would stay in Cleveland if LeBron's there. So now you're just kind of going back a little bit different than you had tried to in the offseason, and just, try to throw something out there because with this pick, you can make a lot of heads turn. And I think that a lot of people will be up to the table with an offer saying, hey, we'll take this. And it might not be the best decision for those guys, and it might not be the smartest decision for the Cavs going forward, but like they say, championships come and go, and you have a chance of winning right now. You better go all in for it, because if LeBron James leaves after this year, whether he does or he doesn't, if he leaves after this year, they're not winning one for a very long time, because there's not going to be another player like LeBron James that walks into Cleveland and saves them from misery for the next 10 to 15 years, because the Celtics are getting that much better.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying, especially with, if you have a shot at a championship, you should go for it. Utah Jazz fans, that's the market I'm from. We're very, very painfully aware of that with Stockton Malone. We wished that our franchise and our management would have done more to help those guys try and win a championship, because, once they're gone, I mean, it's hard to find another Stockton Malone, and it's certainly going to be hard to find another LeBron James. But, again, like, this situation just feels very similar to the first time LeBron was going to leave. Like, it just feels like LeBron's stuck, and it feels like he is going to have to try and make a pitch to these other players like a Paul George or Russell Westbrook to try and come to Cleveland, and that's just not going to work. It's like, why would Dwayne Wade and Chris Paul go to Cleveland when they could have all just met up in Miami, right? And that's what ended up happening. And so it's the same situation. Why would any of those guys go to Cleveland when they can just meet up with LeBron in LA, right? So it just seems like the exact same scenario. So I just would hate to see the Cavaliers make that mistake of mortgaging away the future to try and appease LeBron when the writing just seems so apparent to be on the wall. And really, like, any move that they make again is probably not going to challenge the Warriors, because it's just not going to be enough. So I think they should roll with what they have. But I think that kind of leads into our next topic and our next question, which is, if it's not LeBron and the Cavs, who is the biggest threat to dethrone the Warriors? Do you have any thoughts on who that might be?
Well, based on looking at the Western Conference, I hate counting out the San Antonio Spurs, because I think that's where Popovich wants everybody to be at. If you're counting him out, because let's be honest, the sexy picks right now are Houston, Oklahoma City, and then people like what Minnesota's done. But a lot of people are just like overlooking the Spurs, and I really I love the Thunder, and I love the Thunder's makeup right now, and I love how defensive minded they are. So I would not be shocked if the Thunder are in the Western Conference Finals, because I think they have the best makeup to compete with a team like Golden State and defeat a team like Houston or San Antonio. But if I had to put my money where my mouth is, I can't bet against Coach Popovich. And we saw what he did last year with his roster, and they were in complete control of Game 1. And then Kawhi went out. And so the rest of the series just kind of, faltered off of that issue. And Kawhi is amazing. I mean, Kawhi Leonard is, in my opinion, right there with Kevin Durant at the number 2, arguably the best players in the league right now. Now, I think Kevin Durant's more offensive-minded, but Kawhi's defense is unreal, and he is the guy that makes the Spurs go. So I really like that team. My biggest concern is Tony Parker's health. I mean, they're getting older. That's the thing. And LaMarcus Aldridge has made it clear that he really doesn't want to be there. So I think if they could find a way to, maybe flip LaMarcus, get something of value back that will kind of center around their team, maybe even help them be more compatible with, the Warriors, and if they do go small ball. I like the addition of Rudy Gay. I know Rudy Gay has been kind of a joke, but I think he's got the physical tools to be used properly in a Popovich system with the Spurs. And I think Popovich will bring the best out of Rudy Gay and what he still has left on the table. So, I want to say Oklahoma City is my favorite to get there, but if I had to put my money where my mouth is, I'd have to say the Spurs are the biggest threat. And I don't think anybody in the Eastern Conference has any chance of beating the Warriors except for Cleveland because of LeBron James. Sorry, Boston fans, I just can't do that right now.
Yeah, no, and it's so funny because, like you're saying, I just can never get myself to doubt a Greg Popovich-led team ever again. It just seems like it's been, 6 or 7 years in a row now that people have been talking about, okay, this is the year that the Spurs are going to fall and they're not going to be good. And then, every one of those years, they not only have been great, but they've, seemingly gotten better, right? So, I mean, you look at the Spurs roster, I mean, outside of Kawhi Leonard, I mean, they really don't have anybody. Like you're saying, the Marcus Aldridge, but he's, like you've been mentioning, not really happy there, maybe on his way out. He hasn't really fit their system all that much, so that's not great. Paul Gasol's on his way to retirement. Rudy Gay's coming off an Achilles injury. Ginobili's about to retire. Joffrey Laverne, Danny Green, Patty Mills. That's kind of like the next little group there, and that's certainly not an all-star group that you'd think would be able to challenge the Warriors, who have pretty much an all-NBA starting lineup, right? So, I don't know. I'm with you. I don't want to doubt the Spurs, but I do have questions because they outside of Kawhi Leonard, like they just don't have anybody, and I think the one thing that's in favor of them, outside of that weakness that they're kind of a one-man show is. I think in order to beat the Warriors, you have to beat them system for system, and you have to beat them at their own game. And I think San Antonio is clearly the best coached team in the league, and they have one of the best, if not the best system, and they run it better than anybody in the entire universe. And so I think that in of itself gives them an opportunity to challenge the Warriors. But, at the end of the day, I just think you need more talent than just Kawhi Leonard. As amazing as Kawhi Leonard is, and I'm with you, he's amazing, I just don't think that's enough. And I like Oklahoma City. I like that pick as well. I think it'll be interesting to see what Westbrook can do with another alpha male on the team because, he has the attitude that can win you a playoff series by himself. But we saw, Westbrook in the playoffs and even in the matchups against Golden State in the regular season, as much as he really wanted to win those games and beat Kevin Durant and the Warriors, he just couldn't do it because they would just blitzkrieg him with the entire Warriors roster, and there was nobody there to help him. Right. As great as some of those guys are, like Steven Adams and things like that. So I'm not totally sold on them. I'm not a big Paul George fan, so I think that'll be interesting to see what they do. But I can see that as well. But
let me interrupt you there about Paul real quick
ahead.
Because I'll tell you this: Paul George in the regular season can be a very frustrating player to watch. He's very inconsistent. But when playoff Paul George shows up, I mean, he is darn good, man. And you saw, I'm sure, especially back when they were playing the Heat, those epic battles he had. I think now that he has somebody that can be the alpha male and he can kind of ride his coattails, so to speak, and not have to be the top dog, but just kind of do his thing and be the best defender. Which he might not even have to be with Roberson out there. I think you're going to really see a side of Paul George you probably have never seen because he's going to have someone that is leaps and bounds, above him. And I hate to say that because I think Paul in the playoffs is just phenomenal. But, nobody goes as hard as Westbrook does in the NBA. And so I think seeing someone like that every single night with Paul is going to push Paul to be a better player. And this is probably going to be one of his best chances to possibly reach the Western Conference Finals. So, if he goes to LA, if he loves it there, that's great. But there's no way they're getting past some of these teams in the West. And I think with this roster he has now, this is going to be really good for him. And I hate saying that because I'm a Pacer fan and I hate how we handled everything, but I do believe that Oklahoma is actually a really good opportunity for Paul to succeed and become, a big threat in the Western Conference for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a good and a fair point. And, Oklahoma City, first off, I think they deserve huge props for putting this team together. They lost Kevin Durant not that long ago, right? And now we're talking about them perhaps being the team to challenge the Warriors and get into the Western Conference a year later. That, to me, that is just crazy that you lose a top 5 player in the league and then, a year later you make the moves necessary to get yourself back into contention. I think, they just deserve tons and tons of credit for what they've done. They've added great guys like Patrick Patterson, Raymond Felton, very underrated additions to their depth. And I definitely agree that they're going to be dangerous. But, one of my concerns is with the Westbrook-Paul George combination because we've seen Westbrook be Westbrook, the alpha male Westbrook this last season, and he was unbelievable, averaged a triple-double, won the MVP award. And we've seen Paul George be the alpha male in Indiana for a long time now. And like you mentioned in those playoff series against LeBron and the Miami Heat, he was just incredible. But, my question is, can those guys do that when they have another alpha male on the roster? Because, to a certain extent, in order to be able to do those things, you need to be the guy, not just another guy, but the guy, the one and only guy. And so if you're splitting that or you're trying to split that between two different guys, I don't know. It'll just be interesting to see if they can do that. It's just an interesting dynamic, and I know it's kind of back to the same conversation we had about the Warriors, and if they were going to develop chemistry, and Boston with Kyrie and Gordon, And, you would think that talent can just figure it out. But, Paul George and Russell Westbrook, they have that little bit of an edge to them that, I can see some chemistry things there. And, Paul George, good example this last playoffs, was getting mad at CJ Miles for taking the last shot. Even though CJ Miles probably did what he was supposed to do and probably made the right decision. But that, that's just Paul George's mentality. And so if, I could see, and Westbrook has some of that in him too. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens there, but I definitely see where you're coming from. But yeah, just kind of continuing that conversation. And I mean, honestly, like my pick, if there's anybody to challenge the Warriors, other than the Warriors themselves, I think the Warriors are their biggest enemy and health. I think
right.
if they're healthy and they don't, freak out and have drama, then I think they're going to be just fine, regardless of any of these other teams. But I would actually pick the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets are loaded. I mean, they have Chris Paul and James Harden. And if that wasn't enough for you, they made some very good offseason additions that are very underrated. Luka Mbamute, he used to be on the Clippers. He is very, very good, and he adds more defense to that team, especially on the perimeter, which they need. He was amazing in the playoff series against the Utah Jazz. He really gave Gordon Hayward a hard time in the playoff series when they played each other, and he was really, really impressive. So I think he's a great veteran pickup that's really going to add to the defense, which has been a big weakness of theirs over the last couple seasons. But not only that, I mean, they still have Eric Gordon, they still have Ryan Anderson, they still have Trevor Ariza. They still have all those guys there that are really going to add a lot of depth and a lot of shooting. And, kind of back to my original statement where I think you have to beat Golden State system for system, and you kind of have to beat them at their own game, which sounds crazy. But, I mean, if you go back and look, that's how the Cavaliers beat them in the finals a couple of years ago. They just shot a bunch of threes, and they made a bunch of threes. And, they just made Golden State uncomfortable enough that they were able to pull it out. But, Houston, very much like San Antonio, they're the closest in terms of talent and system, where I think that they might have a chance. I'm not saying that they will. I think that's a prayer of a shot for the Rockets to challenge them. But D'Antoni's system is a offensive genius system, and you
a
have
regular season system.
yeah, and that's a fair criticism. They D'Antoni teams have never been historically very good in the playoffs, and they always say offense doesn't win you championships. But Golden State is a great example that it does. But of course, Golden State also has great defense. So, I mean, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see because they do have such a great offense. I think it'll be interesting to see if guys like Ariza, Luka Mbamute, even a Shareek Black, Clint Capella, if he develops more as a rim protector, if those guys help upgrade their defense just a little bit more. Their offense is so great that they'll be able to match up with the Warriors in that way. And then who knows, maybe they can figure out something defensively and give them a run for their money. But I just think at the end of the day, again, talent wins you games. The Houston Rockets are arguably the most talented team outside of the Warriors in the NBA. So I think that's where, you just have to go talent versus talent, and that's where they have that shot there. But that's kind of my opinion, but I definitely can see San Antonio, Oklahoma City, like you're saying as well.
Yeah, I think those are the top 4 teams in the West, and I really don't think there's much arguing that you're going to get from anybody else about that. I want to give you a couple helpful things that'll help you with your argument. The Houston Rockets already locked up James Harden. They don't have to worry about their stud leaving their team for a long time. And that's one thing that the Thunder do have to worry about. Paul George and Russell Westbrook pending free agency. I mean, that's a big scare. So, they might be a little bit too over-aggressive come the off season, or not the off season, but the trade deadline, and they might try to do too much and kind of mess with their team if it has something good going, because they're really trying to keep these guys together. But the one concern I do have with Houston is how well are they really going to mesh? I mean, I believe that James Harden and Chris Paul can mesh well together, but I do have concerns that it might not work out. With that being said, we see how Chris Paul has been overwhelming for teammates. It's been reported several times in both instances when he was with New Orleans and with the Clippers. He wasn't always the nicest guy in the locker room. He wasn't the guy that everybody wanted to play with. Where I think James Harden kind of is one of those guys, because he's just kind of more laid back, and he just plays the game a lot differently. So I think that I have this feeling that Chris Paul is going to try to take over this team and become more of the ball dominant player, and that's my biggest concern. Is just because I think Chris Paul is really talented and probably still one of the top 3, top 5 point guards in the NBA today, but there's just so many concerns I have with him and his track record come the playoffs.
Yeah, but like to that point, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, right? Like one of the biggest problems with James Harden and the Houston Rockets is, as great as James Harden was last year and arguably, could have split the MVP with Russell Westbrook. I mean, he has had his moments, painful moments in the playoffs and in big games where he looks like he's given up and hasn't been the leader that they've needed him to be. And Chris Paul is the opposite of that. I mean, Chris Paul is always the leader, always the guy that will come through for you, will push guys, will make things happen, and it really is that vocal leader. And so I think, that's where that relationship really is going to be a perfect match, is because Chris Paul can be that edgy leader that the Rockets need and can be that guy at the end of the games where, sometimes James Harden isn't that guy, and James Harden can more easily take a back seat or a side seat to Chris Paul than, like a matchup or a duo pair of a Westbrook and a Paul George. Like I was saying, both Paul George and Westbrook have an edge to them, whereas in this relationship, if you want to call it that, Chris Paul has that edge to him, but James Harden doesn't so much. And so that's where I can see, it's synergistic in that kind of way. And honestly, that's kind of how I see the relationship with Kyrie and Gordon Hayward. Kyrie's kind of an edgy guy like that, but Gordon Hayward definitely isn't. And so I think that's where it's a more natural pairing than some of these other ones. So, I mean, you make a good point. And, honestly, it's like, I think we've said that just about every one of these teams, and that just kind of speaks to all the movement that's happened this NBA offseason is, what teams are going to be the ones that can find the chemistry and figure it out. And I think that's going to be a huge factor moving forward, in the regular season, and especially in the playoffs. It's going to be the teams that have the chemistry, that can figure it out and can work well together and aren't having drama and can really be successful. And the teams that are going to be vulnerable and are going to have those weaknesses there. But, I think it's exciting. But, at the end of the day, there's a team that has great chemistry and has no weaknesses and no drama right now, and that's the Golden State Warriors, and I still don't see anybody challenging them for those reasons and more. So, but yeah, it'll be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. It's just there's so much to talk about, but it doesn't really matter because, like you said, the Warriors are definitely going to be the team that wins it all this year. It's just so hard to see that not happening. And so I guess next week when we come back on, we're going to debate where we see everybody lining up in the Eastern Conference and Western Conference standings. And I think that's going to be a little bit more fun to talk about because that back half of the Western Conference is so chaotic. And I can make cases for about 7 or 8 teams for the last 4 spots in the West.
I was actually going through that before we started recording. I was just trying to, finalize my playoff projections and seedings for each of the conferences. And I think I switched out the 8th seed in the West like 6 times, and every single one of them saying like you could justify it. So yeah, that'll definitely be an interesting and fun conversation to talk about in next week's episode.
Yeah, so just to give you all a little tease, that's what we're going to be hitting on mostly, Western Conference, Eastern Conference breakdown. We might even just break down the divisions too as well, go about an hour long as well. The new setup of this thing is to kind of have debates going, and then at the end of the show we're going to have a guest on to do a major debate. But unfortunately, the guy that we had on schedule today, Jonathan Bates, who has been very hot take-ish, and that is not a knock on him at all. He just has a lot of opinions that he puts out there, and he's been kind of getting railed out there, I guess you could say, on NBA Twitter for him. But he sticks up and he stays with his comments, so I give him that. Whether he's Skip Bayless-esque or if he's Stephen A. Smith-esque, he sticks with his comments and he sticks with his opinions, and I appreciate that. He's going to come on the show soon, though, and he's going to debate us a little bit about Derrick Rose and whether he still has it or not. And I'm sure you guys can figure out what side he's on of that just by that comment, and what side me and Mark are both on. So he was unable to come on today. Couldn't get a hold of him because he was busy with work. So hopefully next time he'll be able to come on and join us and we can debate a little bit. But I think that we pretty much covered a lot of good content for you guys today. And if you guys have anything you want us to cover, you can just hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Alex Golden NBA, and you can find us, our actual podcast show. It's called the Courtroom Pod. Just as simple as it sounds, the Courtroom Pod. And then Mark, you can find Mark at Mark_Wallen, and that's WAHLEN. If you have anything you want us to debate, because we want you fans to be involved with us, and this is what it's all about. We do have a free jersey giveaway that I'm going to be heading up once we reach a certain amount of followers. So I think I said 500, but maybe it's 1,000. I'm not sure. I'll tweet that back out. Do you remember what I said, Mark?
Honestly, I don't, but might as well go for 1,000, right? The more the merrier.
Right. Yeah. So if we can get up to 1,000, it's hard to make your own following, right? So if you're listening this far, we really appreciate it, and just spread the word out there. We're going to give a free jersey. We do this podcast for free. We don't get paid for it. We just do this because we love basketball. We want to interact with people, just to get a different feel for things. And so, this is a free jersey. I'm not getting paid any money, so I'm paying for this out of my own pocket, just so you guys can interact with us and help make this show a success, because we want to do good things with it, but like we said, we need that following. And so I think we have a pretty good following so far, but the more we can grow, the better that is for everybody, especially our guys at the Grueling Truth Network. So anything else you want to throw in there, Mark, just to plug anything for yourself?
No, all that was great right there at the end. Like you said, we'd love to hear from you guys, so please be sure to interact with us on social media. And just thanks for letting me come on the show, Alex. I'm super excited to get this rolling, and looking forward to a great rest of the NBA offseason. And the NBA season's creeping up on us here pretty soon, so it'll be fun to keep this going. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I've taken the last month off pretty much, and I have just been itching to talk some basketball with you. So I'm glad we kind of took this break. It got me more vamped up for the podcast, and excited to see what's going on with the rest of the season. So with that being said, my man, I will talk to you next Monday as we talk about the Western Conference and Eastern Conference previews. All right?
All right. Thanks, man. See ya.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi.